A judge stares down from his bench at what he assumes is just another naive teenager who wandered into the wrong courtroom. But when the girl opens her briefcase, his dismissive smile fades. Stacked inside are meticulously organized documents, exposing a web of corporate corruption that cost her father his life. 5 years ago, they ruled his car crash an accident, buried the truth under legal papers and corporate power. Now his daughter stands in the same courtroom where he once fought for justice, barely 17 but with his same unwavering spirit. The corporate lawyers laugh, the judge raises his eyebrows, but there's steel in her voice as she begins her opening statement. Some children inherit wealth, others inherit unfinished battles. This one inherited her father's last case, and she won't stop until justice is served. But before we start, tell us in the comments where you are watching from today, and if you like this story, please subscribe. The wooden double doors of courtroom 342 creaked open as 17-year-old Leah Brooks straightened her navy blazer, her heart pounding against her ribs. The afternoon sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Every eye in the packed courtroom turned to stare at her, some curious, others dismissive, as she made her way toward the plaintiff's table. Behind her, whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. "Is that a student? Must be lost. Where's her lawyer?" Leah kept her chin high, gripping her leather briefcase, her father's old one, until her knuckles whitened. The familiar smell of leather and polish brought back memories of sitting in his office as a little girl, watching him prepare for trial. "Order." Judge Richard Grayson's voice boomed through the courtroom, silencing the murmurs. His steel gray, eyes fixed on Leah, his expression a mixture of annoyance and amusement. The corner of his mouth twitched as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Young lady, the high school mock trial competition is down the hall. This is a civil court proceeding." Laughter erupted from the gallery, and William Delaney, the defense attorney, didn't bother. Perfectly tailored suit probably cost more than Leah's entire wardrobe. He leaned back in his chair, watching the scene unfold with obvious enjoyment. Leah set her briefcase on the wooden table, her movements deliberate and composed. "Your Honor, I am Leah Brooks, and I'm here to represent the plaintiff, Diana Brooks, in case number 2025 CV 4721. Her voice carried clearly across the courtroom, steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "I've filed all necessary paperwork to appear pro se on behalf of my mother." Judge Grayson's amusement faded, replaced by skepticism as he shuffled through the papers on his bench. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing second. In the gallery, Leah's mother, Diana, sat rigid in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent worrying about this moment. "Ms. Brooks," Delaney drawled, rising from his seat. His voice dripped with condescension. "While I appreciate your enthusiasm for playing dress-up, this is a serious matter involving complex corporate law. Perhaps we should postpone until your mother can secure proper legal representation." Leah met his gaze evenly. "Mr. Delaney, I assure you I'm fully prepared to proceed. Unless you're concerned about facing an opponent who hasn't been bought by your client's deep pockets." A collective gasp rose from the spectators. Judge Grayson's gavel cracked against the sound block. "That's enough, Ms. Brooks. While the law allows for pro se representation, I have serious reservations about your ability to handle this case." "Your Honor," Leah began, opening her briefcase with practiced precision. "I understand your concerns, but I'd like to present my opening statement. After that, if you still believe I'm incapable of proceeding, I'll withdraw." She paused, her dark eyes meeting the judge's. "All I'm asking for is 5 minutes to demonstrate my preparation." Judge Grayson leaned back, studying her for a long moment. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Proceed, Ms. Brooks, but I warn you, this isn't a school presentation. I expect proper legal argumentation." Leah stepped out from behind the table, her heels clicking against the floor. The sound echoed in the silent courtroom. She'd practiced this moment hundreds of times in front of her bedroom mirror, but now, surrounded by doubting faces, everything felt different. Real. "Your Honor, members of the court," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. This case is about more than wrongful termination. It's about corporate corruption that destroys lives and careers with impunity. My mother, Diana Brooks, worked for Reynolds Dynamic Solutions for 15 years, earning consistent promotions and exemplary performance reviews. Leah moved with purpose, her gestures measured and precise. 3 months ago, she discovered irregularities in the company's financial reports, irregularities that suggested systematic fraud. When she brought these concerns to her superiors, following every protocol in the employee handbook, she was terminated without cause or explanation. Delaney shifted in his seat, his smirk fading slightly. In the gallery, several reporters leaned forward, their pens scratching against notepads. We will present evidence of a pattern of retaliation against employees who dare to question unethical practices. We will show documentation of altered financial records, witness testimony from former employees, and a clear timeline connecting my mother's ethical concerns to her abrupt termination. Judge Grayson's expression had shifted from skepticism to careful neutrality as he listened. Leah continued, her passion for justice, inherited from her father, burning in every word. Reynolds Dynamic Solutions believed they could silence another voice of conscience through intimidation and financial pressure. They assumed a single mother without resources would quietly disappear. Leah paused, scanning the courtroom. They were wrong. In the back row, a woman Leah hadn't noticed before caught her attention. Unlike the other spectators, she sat completely still, her expression unreadable. Something about her seemed familiar, but Leah couldn't place it. Your Honor, by the conclusion of this trial, we will prove not only that my mother's termination was unjust, but that it was part of a larger pattern of corporate malfeasance that demands accountability. We seek not only damages but justice, justice that sends a clear message that no corporation is above the law. Leah returned to her table, heart racing but her exterior calm. The courtroom remained silent for several long seconds after she finished. Judge Grayson cleared his throat. Mr. Delaney, your opening statement. Delaney rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, while Ms. Brooks has presented an interesting narrative, the facts will show a very different story. Diana Brooks was terminated for legitimate performance issues, fully documented and properly executed according to company policy. This lawsuit is nothing more than a desperate attempt to extract money from a respected corporation through baseless accusations and emotional manipulation. As Delaney continued his statement, Leah noticed him glancing her way repeatedly, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by something closer to concern. She'd surprised him, and he didn't like surprises. The mysterious woman in the back row shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, her eyes met Leah's. A slight nod, so subtle Leah might have imagined it, passed between them before the woman returned her attention to Delaney. Judge Grayson listened to both opening statements before consulting his calendar. Given the complexity of this case, we'll adjourn for today and resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. He fixed Leah with a stern look. Ms. Brooks, while your opening statement showed preparation, don't expect special treatment because of your age. This court will hold you to the same standards as any other attorney. I wouldn't want it any other way, Your Honor, Leah responded confidently. As the gallery began to empty, reporters surged forward shouting questions. Ms. Brooks, how old are you? Did you really prepare this case yourself? What made you decide to represent your mother? Leah gathered her materials calmly, ignoring the cameras and microphones thrust in her direction. Diana made her way to the plaintiff's table, her eyes shining with pride despite her obvious anxiety. You were amazing, Diana whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand. This is just the beginning, Mom, Leah replied softly. We have a long way to go. They made their way toward the exit, reporters trailing behind them. Delaney watched them leave, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. The mysterious woman had already disappeared. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps. Cameras flashed as Leah and Diana descended, but Leah maintained her composure, offering only a polite, no comment to the barrage of questions. A sleek black car idled at the curb, and through its tinted windows, Leah caught a glimpse of the mysterious woman from the courtroom. Before she could process this, the car pulled away, merging smoothly into traffic. Diana clutched her purse tightly, her shoulders tense. "Leah, are you sure about this? It's not too late to find a real lawyer." Leah turned to her mother, determination burning in her eyes. "Mom, trust me. Dad taught me more than they realize, and I've been preparing for this moment my whole life." She squared her shoulders, channeling the confidence she'd displayed in the courtroom. "Besides, we've already got them worried. Did you see Delaney's face when I finished my opening statement?" As they walked to their car, Leah felt the weight of what lay ahead. Tomorrow the real battle would begin. She had surprised them today, but surprise wouldn't be enough. She needed to prove herself with every motion, every objection, every cross-examination. The setting sun painted the courthouse windows orange as Leah took one last look at the building. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear her father's voice. "Justice isn't about who has the most money or the fanciest degree. It's about who has the truth and the courage to fight for it." She'd shown them she wasn't afraid to fight. Tomorrow she would show them why they should be afraid of her. 3 months earlier, in the dim light of their apartment kitchen, Diana Brooks stared at the termination letter in her trembling hands. The official Reynolds Dynamic Solutions letterhead seemed to mock her 15 years of dedication. Leah watched from the doorway as her mother read the words again, as if hoping they might somehow change. "Effective immediately." Diana's voice cracked. She placed the letter on their worn kitchen table, next to a stack of unpaid bills. "They didn't even give me a chance to explain. 15 years, Leah. 15 years of perfect performance reviews, and they throw me away like yesterday's trash." Leah moved to the refrigerator, pulling out leftovers from their dwindling food supply. The clock on the microwave blinked 9:47 p.m. Diana had spent hours at the office trying to appeal the decision before security escorted her out. "Tell me everything, Mom, from the beginning." Diana ran her fingers through her graying hair, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "I found discrepancies in the quarterly reports, big ones. The numbers didn't add up. Millions of dollars that seemed to vanish into thin air. When I brought it up to Mr. Thompson, he brushed it off, said I was misreading the data." "But you weren't," Leah stated, setting a plate of reheated pasta in front of her mother. "No, I wasn't. I kept digging, quietly at first. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. Shell companies, falsified invoices, mysterious consulting fees to firms that don't exist." Diana pushed the pasta away, her appetite gone. "I followed protocol, documented everything, and took it to the ethics committee. The next day, security was waiting at my desk." Leah sat down, her mind racing. "Did they give you any severance?" 2 weeks' pay, conditional on signing a non-disclosure agreement." Diana laughed bitterly. "They want me to stay quiet about what I found. Did you sign it?" "No." "But Leah, what choice do I have? We can barely make rent as it is. Your college applications." "Don't worry about my college applications," Leah interrupted. "We need to fight this." Diana shook her head. "With what money? No lawyer will take this case without a massive retainer. Reynolds has an army of attorneys. They'll bury us in paperwork before we ever see a courtroom." Leah stood up, walking to the living room bookshelf. Among the family photos sat a row of law books, her father's collection. James Brooks had been a civil rights attorney, fighting for the underdogs until a car accident took him 5 years ago. She pulled out his worn copy of Civil Procedure in State Courts. "What are you doing?" Diana asked, following her. "Research." Leah opened the book, inhaling the familiar scent of old paper and leather. "Dad used to say the law is like a puzzle. If you understand the pieces, you can make them fit." "Sweetheart, this isn't one of your mock trial competitions. This is real." "I know it's real, Mom. That's why we have to fight." Leah turned to face her mother. "Dad taught me everything he knew about the law since I was old enough to read. I've won every mock trial competition in the state. I've studied his case files, his strategies. You're 17, almost 18, And in this state, I can represent you pro se with your consent. Leah pulled out her laptop, opening a blank document. Tell me everything again, from the beginning. Every detail. Diana sank onto the couch, watching her daughter, with a mixture of pride and concern. You're just like your father, you know that? He had that same look in his eyes when he took on impossible cases. Over the next few weeks, their apartment transformed into a makeshift law office. Leah covered the living room walls with timelines, sticky notes, and legal citations. She spent every free moment between classes studying labor law, corporate regulations, and civil procedure. Her father's books became her constant companions. One evening, while sorting through her mother's work documents, Leah discovered a hidden folder in Diana's email backup. "Mom!" she called out, excitement in her voice. "Come look at this!" Diana hurried over, still wearing her waitress uniform from her new part-time job. "What did you find?" "These emails. They're from the week before you were fired. Look at the metadata." Leah pointed to the screen. "They've been altered. The originals were deleted, but the server kept shadow copies. Someone tried to cover their tracks, but they got sloppy." Diana leaned closer, reading the exchanges between executives. They knew about the fraud all along. They were planning to pin it on me if anyone started asking questions. This is exactly what we needed. Leah began printing copies, her hands shaking with excitement. We can prove premeditation. As Diana read through the emails, her expression darkened. Leah, these people, they're dangerous. If they went to these lengths to silence me, all the more reason to expose them. Leah stood up, pacing the room. Dad always said corruption thrives in silence. The more people stay quiet, the bolder they become. The next morning, Leah visited 3 law firms presenting their case. Each meeting ended the same way, sympathetic looks followed by polite rejections. "Look, kid," said Harrison Wells, a senior partner at the last firm. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But Reynolds Dynamic Solutions has more resources than, God. They'll bury you in motions, drag this out for years. Even if you had an airtight case, which you don't, the cost of discovery alone would bankrupt you." Leah gathered her documents, maintaining her composure. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Wells." As she waited for the bus home, Leah pulled out her father's old pocket watch, his lucky charm in court. The inscription inside read, "Justice is not a gift, but a fight worth having." That night, she found Diana crying in the kitchen, bills spread across the table. "We can't afford the rent next month," Diana whispered. "Maybe I should just sign their agreement. Take the severance." "No." Leah sat down, taking her mother's hands. "Remember what Dad used to say about bullies? They count on people giving up. That's how they win." "Your father had a law degree and 20 years of experience," Diana countered, "and even he struggled against corporations like Reynolds. But he never gave up." Leah pulled out her laptop, opening the civil court website. "And neither will we." Over the next month, Leah developed a routine. School during the day, legal research until midnight, then 2 hours of sleep before starting again. She studied successful, wrongful termination cases, learning their strategies. She practiced objections in the shower, rehearsed opening statements while walking to school. Diana watched her daughter's transformation with growing amazement. The teenager who once spent hours on social media now pored over legal precedents with intense focus. Leah's bedroom walls, once covered with movie posters, now displayed complex legal arguments and case citations. One Saturday morning, Diana found Leah asleep at her desk, surrounded by highlighted documents. On her computer screen was a completed legal brief, 50 pages of meticulously researched arguments. Diana picked up one of the papers, reading Leah's handwritten notes in the margin. Cross-reference with Thompson v. Miller, 2019. Similar pattern of retaliation. She gently shook her daughter awake. "Honey, you need real sleep. This isn't healthy." Leah blinked, disoriented. "I'm fine. Just need to finish the motion." "You've been at this for weeks. Maybe we should reconsider." "I found something, Mom." Leah sat up, rubbing her eyes. Remember that consulting firm they kept paying? I traced the ownership. It leads back to shell companies, but there's a pattern. Every time they made a payment, large sums of money disappeared from the company's charitable foundation. Diana frowned. The Foundation for Children's Education? Exactly. They're using it to launder money. That's why they panicked when you started asking questions. Leah pulled up a spreadsheet. I can prove it. We just need to get this in front of a judge. The following week, Leah officially filed their lawsuit. The court clerk did a double take when she saw Leah's age on the forms, but couldn't find any legal reason to reject them. As they left the courthouse, reporters were already gathering, intrigued by the unusual case. Are you sure about this? Diana asked as they drove home. Once we start, there's no going back. Leah looked at the manila envelope containing their court filing. Do you remember what Dad said in his last case? Sometimes the law is all that stands between justice and chaos. We have the truth on our side, Mom. Now we just need to prove it. That night, as Leah organized her files for the upcoming battle, she found an old photo of her father in court. He stood at the podium, passionate and fearless, fighting for what he believed in. She placed the photo on her desk, drawing strength from his memory. A week before the trial, Diana found Leah practicing her opening statement in front of the bathroom mirror at 3 a.m. The foundation of our justice system, Leah declared to her reflection, rests on the principle that no one is above the law. Diana leaned against the doorframe, watching her daughter. In that moment, she saw James, his determination, his passion for justice, his unwavering courage. Maybe, she thought, they really did have a chance. The day before the trial, Leah made final preparations in their living room. In color-coded folders, exhibits labeled and indexed, legal citations double-checked. Diana brought her a cup of tea, sitting beside her on the couch. I found this in your father's old briefcase, Diana said, holding out a small notebook. It's from his first trial. Leah opened it carefully. Inside, in her father's neat handwriting, were notes about staying calm under pressure, connecting with jurors, and maintaining focus during long court days. On the last page, he'd written, "Remember why you're here. It's not about winning or losing. It's about standing up for what's right." As sunset painted their apartment in golden light, Leah packed her father's old briefcase with everything she'd need for court. Each document represented hours of preparation, each exhibit a piece of the puzzle she'd assembled. Whatever happens tomorrow, Diana said, helping her organize the files, I want you to know how proud I am of you, how proud your father would be. Leah closed the briefcase, the sound of the latches echoing in the quiet room. They think they can intimidate us because we don't have money or connections, but Dad always said the law doesn't care about any of that. It only cares about the truth. Later that night, as Diana slept, Leah stood at their apartment window, watching the city lights. Tomorrow, she would step into that courtroom and fight not just for her mother, but for everyone who'd ever been silenced by power and money. She touched her father's pocket watch, drawing strength from its familiar weight. I won't let you down, Dad, she whispered to the night sky. I promise. In her room, the alarm clock blinked 11:47 p.m. In just a few hours, she would face William, Delaney in the full might of Reynolds Dynamic Solutions. They would underestimate her, mock her, try to intimidate her. But Leah Brooks, daughter of James Brooks, was ready for the fight of her life. Morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of the Brooks apartment, illuminating a living room transformed into a war room. Leah sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by towers of legal documents, court precedents, and highlighted transcripts. Her laptop displayed a complex spreadsheet tracking every piece of evidence, every potential witness, and every legal strategy she'd developed. Motion to compel, motion in limine, voir dire procedures, she muttered, organizing folders with color-coded tabs. The coffee table had disappeared beneath stacks of employment law textbooks borrowed from the public library. Her father's old legal pad sat open beside her, filled with her neat handwriting, questions for witnesses, possible objections, counter-arguments to every challenge she could anticipate. The microwave beeped, and Diana emerged from the kitchen with 2 cups of instant noodles. "You need to eat something, sweetheart." She carefully navigated through the paper maze, settling beside her daughter. Leah accepted the cup without looking up from her work. "Thanks, Mom. I think I found something interesting in the Thompson versus Stanley case from 2021. They used a similar argument about constructive dismissal that could help us establish." "Leah." Diana's gentle interruption made her daughter finally look up. "When was the last time you slept?" "I got a few hours last night," Leah protested, but the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. She'd been working nearly around the clock since filing the lawsuit, treating every minute as precious preparation time. Diana picked up one of the documents, a detailed timeline of events leading to her termination. "This is incredibly thorough. I didn't even remember some of these meetings until I saw them listed here." "Details matter," Leah replied, pulling up another document on her laptop. "Every conversation, every email, every memo, they all tell part of the story. We just have to help the judge see the whole picture." A knock at the door made both women freeze. They weren't expecting anyone, and these days, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. Diana moved to answer it while Leah quickly saved her work and closed her laptop. Outside stood a delivery person holding a large manila envelope. "Delivery for Leah Brooks," he announced, holding out an electronic signature pad. After he left, Leah examined the envelope carefully. No return address, no company logo, just her name typed in standard font. "This is strange," she murmured, opening it carefully. Inside were copies of internal Reynolds Dynamic Solutions documents, financial records, board meeting minutes, and most importantly, a series of emails discussing the Children's Charitable Foundation. Leah's eyes widened as she scanned the contents. "Mom, look at this." She spread the papers across the floor. "These are exactly the kind of records we needed, but couldn't access. Someone inside the company must have sent them." Diana frowned, picking up one of the emails. "How do we know they're real? This could be a trap." "We'll verify everything independently," Leah assured her, already creating a new spreadsheet to cross-reference the information. "But if these are authentic, they prove the foundation was being used to hide fraudulent transactions." As she worked to authenticate the documents, Leah couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. Twice in the past week, she'd noticed a black sedan parked across from their apartment building. The day before, a man in a suit had followed her home from school, maintaining just enough distance to claim coincidence. That afternoon, Leah decided to conduct a mock trial, using their small apartment as a courtroom. She transformed their living room, arranging chairs to simulate the court layout. Diana sat in the witness stand, actually their old armchair, while Leah practiced her questioning. "Mrs. Brooks, could you please describe the events of March 15th? Leah began, maintaining a professional tone despite the makeshift setting. Diana straightened in her chair, getting into character. "I arrived at work at my usual time, 8:15 a.m. During my morning review of the quarterly reports, I noticed discrepancies in the charitable foundation's disbursements." "Could you be more specific about these discrepancies?" "Large payments were being made to consulting firms I'd never heard of. When I tried to verify these firms' credentials, I couldn't find any record of them existing." Leah nodded, making notes. "And what actions did you take upon discovering these irregularities?" They continued like this for hours, refining answers, identifying weak points, and strengthening their narrative. Diana watched in amazement as her daughter shifted seamlessly between roles: questioner, objector, even judge, drawing on everything she'd learned from years of watching her father work. As evening approached, they were interrupted by another, unexpected delivery. This time, a small note slipped under their door. Leah retrieved it cautiously, reading aloud, "Trust no one in that courtroom." "What's that supposed to mean?" Diana asked, peering over her shoulder. "I don't know," Leah admitted, studying the typed note. "But whoever sent those documents this morning might be trying to warn us about something." Later that night, while Diana slept, Leah worked on her cross-examination strategies. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft tapping of her keyboard and the distant sound of city traffic. A movement caught her eye, someone walking past their window. They lived on the 4th floor. Heart pounding, Leah crept to the window. A figure in dark clothing was scaling down the fire escape. By the time she reached for her phone to call the police, they had disappeared into the shadows. The next morning, Leah discovered her case files had been disturbed. Nothing was missing, but someone had definitely been through them. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. Several folders were slightly out of alignment with her color coding system. "We need to make copies of everything," she told Diana over breakfast. "Multiple copies, stored in different locations. Maybe we should go to the police," Diana suggested, but Leah shook her head. "With what evidence? Besides, Reynolds probably has connections in the department. We need to be smart about this." At school that day, Leah used her lunch break to review witness statements in the library. As she read, she noticed a woman sitting several tables away, pretending to read but watching her over the top of a magazine. The same woman she'd glimpsed in the courtroom during the initial hearing. Instead of confronting her, Leah packed up her things and left through the library's back exit, taking a circuitous route home. The woman followed at a distance, professional, enough to maintain plausible deniability, but obvious enough to send a message. "We're watching you." That evening, Leah received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line read, "Your father's last case." Inside was a single attachment, a newspaper article about James Brooks's fatal car accident 5 years ago. The article mentioned mechanical failure as the cause, but included a quote from James saying he was working on a major corporate fraud case in the weeks before his death. Leah's hands shook as she read the article. She'd never seen this piece before. Despite spending months researching her father's death, the timing couldn't be coincidence. "I don't like this," Diana said when Leah showed her the email. "First the documents, then the break-in, now this? They're trying to scare us." "No," Leah replied, her voice firm. "They're trying to warn us. Someone wants us to know what we're really up against." She spent the next few hours implementing better security measures. Their files were now backed up on encrypted drives, copies, stored with trusted friends. She installed new locks on the windows and a security camera facing the fire escape. The following day, she arranged her father's old case files chronologically, looking for any connection to Reynolds Dynamic Solutions or their subsidiaries. James had been meticulous in his note-taking, but many of his later files were surprisingly sparse, as if he'd started keeping certain details off the record. While searching through a box of his old papers, Leah found a business card tucked into the lining. The name had faded, but she could make out part of an email address, ajusticeforall.org, an organization she'd never heard of. A quick internet search revealed nothing about the organization, but that didn't surprise her. If her father had been investigating corporate fraud, his contacts would have been careful about their online presence. That night, Leah practiced her cross-examination of William Delaney, anticipating his responses and planning her counter-moves. Diana played Delaney's role, doing her best to mimic his condescending attitude. "Mr. Delaney, isn't it true that Reynolds Dynamic Solutions has a history of terminating employees who report ethical concerns?" "Objection, Your Honor." "Calls for speculation," Diana replied in her best Delaney impression. "I'll rephrase," Leah countered smoothly. "Mr. Delaney, how many employees have filed whistleblower complaints against Reynolds in the past 5 years? They continued this way for hours, refining questions, adjusting tactics, strengthening weak points." Leah recorded everything, listening back to identify areas where her voice wavered or her arguments needed tightening. The next morning, another envelope arrived, this time containing printed emails between Reynolds executives discussing the problem of employees asking too many questions about the charitable foundation. The emails were dated just days before Diana's termination. As Leah added these to her evidence file, she noticed something odd. The metadata on these emails showed they'd been printed from within Reynolds' corporate network yesterday. Someone inside the company was actively helping them, taking enormous risks to provide evidence. "We need to be careful with these," she told Diana. "If they catch whoever's helping us—" "They won't," a voice said from their doorway. Both women spun around, Standing there was the mysterious woman from the courtroom and library, holding up a keycard that identified her as Sandra Mercer, former legal counsel for Reynolds Dynamic Solutions. "You've done impressive work, Leah," Sandra said, closing the door behind her. "But you're only seeing part of the picture. There's much more at stake here than your mother's wrongful termination." "How did you get in here?" Leah demanded, positioning herself between the woman and Diana. "The same way I've been getting everything else to you," Sandra replied calmly. "We need to talk. What you've uncovered, it goes deeper than you know. Much deeper." Leah studied the woman carefully, remembering her father's words. "In law, like chess, every move has consequences. The trick is knowing which pieces are really in play." "Tell me everything," Leah said, pulling out her legal pad. Sandra sat down, her expression grave. "It started 10 years ago with a series of seemingly unrelated corporate acquisitions. Reynolds wasn't just buying companies, they were buying silence. Your father was close to exposing it all when he had his accident," Leah finished, her voice tight. "Which wasn't an accident at all," Sandra confirmed. "The question is, are you ready to finish what he started?" Outside, the black sedan was parked across the street again, its tinted windows concealing whoever watched their building. But now, for the first time, Leah felt like they might have a real chance at victory. She pulled out her father's pocket watch, running her thumb over the inscription about justice. "Tell me what you know," she said to Sandra. "Tell me everything." The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Leah arranged her documents on the plaintiff's table. Her hands moved with practiced precision, placing each folder exactly where she'd need it. The gallery behind her filled quickly. Word had spread about the teenage girl taking on Reynolds Dynamic Solutions. Diana sat in the front row, wearing her best dress and trying to hide her nervousness. Sandra Mercer slipped into a seat near the back, her presence both reassuring and concerning. After their late-night conversation, Leah understood the true stakes of this fight. William Delaney swept into the courtroom flanked by 2 junior attorneys, their matching suits and leather briefcases speaking of corporate wealth and power. He glanced at Leah's meticulously organized table and smirked. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Grayson entered. The room fell silent. "Be seated," Judge Grayson commanded, adjusting his reading glasses. "Ms. Brooks, are you prepared to proceed with your first witness?" Leah stood, her navy blazer crisp and professional. "Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Margaret Wilson." A middle-aged woman with graying hair made her way to the witness stand. She'd worked alongside Diana in the accounting department for 12 years before taking early retirement, or so the official story went. After Margaret was sworn in, Leah approached the podium. "Mrs. Wilson, how long did you work at Reynolds Dynamic Solutions?" 12 years and 4 months, Margaret replied, her voice steady but quiet. "And during that time, did you work directly with Diana Brooks?" "Yes, for about 8 years. We shared responsibility for reviewing quarterly financial reports and charitable foundation disbursements." Leah nodded, establishing eye contact. "Could you describe the events that led to your departure from Reynolds last year?" "Objection," Delaney interrupted, rising smoothly. "Relevance to the current case?" "Your Honor," Leah responded. "Mrs. Wilson's experience establishes a pattern of behavior directly relevant to my client's wrongful termination." Judge Grayson considered for a moment. "I'll allow it. But keep it focused, Ms. Brooks." "Thank you, Your Honor." Leah turned back to Margaret. "Please continue, Mrs. Wilson." Margaret squared her shoulders. "I noticed irregularities in the foundation's disbursements, large payments to consulting firms that seemed to exist only on paper. When I brought my concerns to management, I was suddenly placed on a performance improvement plan. 2 weeks later, they offered me early retirement with a generous severance package, contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement. Did you sign the agreement?" "Yes," Margaret admitted, looking down. "I couldn't afford not to. I have medical bills and my husband was recently laid off." "No further questions at this time," Leah said, returning to her seat. Delaney rose for cross-examination, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. "Mrs. Wilson, isn't it true that you had received several negative performance reviews in the months leading up to your retirement?" "No, that's not true," My reviews were excellent until I reported those irregularities. Really? Delaney produced a document with flourish. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Defense Exhibit 14 into evidence. These are Mrs. Wilson's performance reviews from her last 6 months of employment. Leah studied the documents as they were handed to her. The formatting looked correct, but something caught her eye. A tiny inconsistency in the header font. Objection. Your Honor. Authentication. Leah stood. I'd like to voir dire the witness about these documents. Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow but nodded. Proceed. Leah approached Margaret with the reviews. Mrs. Wilson, have you ever seen these performance evaluations before today? Margaret adjusted her glasses, examining the papers. No, I haven't. My last review was conducted by Mr. Thompson, and it was entirely positive. Your Honor, Leah said, I move to exclude these documents. We can demonstrate they were created after Mrs. Wilson's departure, using manipulated dates. Delaney's confident expression flickered. Your Honor, we can provide authentication through the HR department. The metadata tells a different story, Leah interrupted, producing another document. I have here the digital forensics report showing these files were created 3 days after Mrs. Wilson's retirement date. Judge Grayson frowned at Delaney. Counselor, approach the bench. As both attorneys moved forward, Leah could feel the tension in the courtroom rising. She'd drawn first blood, catching Delaney in a clumsy attempt at evidence manipulation. Mr. Delaney, Judge Grayson's voice was cold. If I find any more questionable evidence in my courtroom, there will be severe consequences. These documents are excluded. The jury will disregard Defense Exhibit 14. Back at their tables, Delaney conferred urgently with his junior attorneys while Leah continued her examination. Mrs. Wilson, did you ever discuss your concerns about the Foundation's finances with Diana Brooks? Yes, about a month before my retirement. She had noticed similar discrepancies and wanted to compare notes. And what did you tell her? I warned her to be careful. I'd seen what happened to others who asked too many questions. Margaret's voice trembled slightly. There was Robert Chen in internal audit, Sarah Martinez in compliance. They all disappeared after raising concerns. Objection. Hearsay, Delaney called out. Your Honor, Mrs. Wilson is testifying to her direct observations and conversations, Leah countered. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Brooks. As the morning progressed, Leah methodically built her case through Margaret's testimony. Each question revealed another piece of the puzzle, the pattern of retaliation, the suspicious financial transactions, the culture of fear within Reynolds. During the lunch recess, Diana hugged her daughter tightly. You were amazing, she whispered. The way you caught them with those fake documents. They'll be more careful now, Leah warned, reviewing her notes for the afternoon session. Delaney won't make the same mistake twice. Sandra approached them, discreetly. You've rattled them, she murmured. But watch your back. They're already making calls, trying to dig up dirt on Margaret. When court resumed, Delaney called his first witness, Thomas Thompson, Diana's former supervisor. He cut, an imposing figure in his tailored suit, exuding corporate authority. Mr. Thompson, Delaney began, could you describe Mrs. Brooks's performance in her final months at Reynolds? Certainly. Diana had become increasingly erratic, making unfounded accusations and disrupting team meetings with conspiracy theories about our charitable foundation. Leah watched Diana's face tighten at the lies. She touched her father's pocket watch, drawing strength from it as she prepared for cross-examination. No further questions, Delaney said, sitting down with a satisfied smile. Leah approached the podium, her mind racing through possible angles of attack. Thompson was too well prepared for a direct confrontation. She needed another approach. Mr. Thompson, you've worked at Reynolds for how long? 22 years, he replied proudly. And in that time, how many employees have filed ethical concerns about financial irregularities? Thompson shifted slightly. I wouldn't know the exact number. Would reviewing the HR records refresh your recollection? Leah asked innocently, producing a stack of documents. Objection, Delaney was on his feet. These records weren't included in discovery. Your Honor, these are public records from wrongful termination suits filed against Reynolds. We're happy to provide copies to counsel. Judge Grayson nodded. Overruled. The witness may answer. Thompson's composure cracked slightly as he scanned the documents. I see several complaints here. 17 to be exact, Leah pressed. All from employees in the financial departments, all terminated shortly after reporting concerns. Did you supervise any of these employees? Some of them, yes, including Robert Chen, who discovered unusual payments from the charitable foundation in 2022. Thompson's face reddened. That situation was different. Different how? Leah interrupted. Different because Mr. Chen threatened to go to the SEC with his findings? Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Delaney called out. Sustained. Judge Grayson ruled. Ms. Brooks, stay focused on your client's case. Leah nodded, changing tack. Mr. Thompson, when did you first become aware of Diana Brooks's concerns about the foundation's finances? She mentioned something in passing during a team meeting, but her allegations were completely unfounded. Really? I have here an email you sent to the board of directors the day after that meeting. Would you like to read it aloud? Thompson paled as Leah handed him the document. It was one of the anonymous deliveries they'd received, proving he'd warned the board about Diana's discovery of the fraudulent payments. I don't recall this email, he stammered. Your Honor, Delaney interjected. May we approach? At the bench, Delaney argued furiously about the email's provenance, while Leah calmly explained its authentication. Judge Grayson admitted the evidence, and Thompson's testimony began to unravel. By day's end, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Leah had scored significant points, but Delaney's expression suggested he had something planned for tomorrow. Outside, the courthouse, reporters swarmed them again. Ms. Brooks, how did you obtain the internal emails? Are you concerned about retaliation from Reynolds? Leah guided her mother through the crowd, offering only a polite, no comment. But she noticed Delaney watching them from the top of the courthouse steps, speaking urgently into his phone. Back at their apartment, Diana ordered pizza to celebrate the day's victories. The look on Thompson's face when you produced that email, she laughed. I've never seen him so flustered. It's not over, Leah cautioned, already preparing for tomorrow. Delaney will hit back hard. We need to be ready, Sandra called later that evening. They're planning something, she warned. Emergency meetings all afternoon. Be careful tomorrow. Leah worked late into the night, reviewing depositions and preparing for possible surprises. Around midnight, she noticed a new email, another anonymous message containing a single line. Watch out for Peterson's testimony. Mark Peterson was scheduled to testify tomorrow, another of Diana's former colleagues. Leah had interviewed him weeks ago, and he'd seemed supportive of their case. But now, she pulled out Peterson's statement, reading it again with fresh eyes. There were inconsistencies she'd missed before, careful word choices that could be twisted against them. Diana found her daughter still working at dawn, legal pad filled with new notes and strategies. Did you sleep at all? Couldn't, Leah replied, straightening her papers. Something's coming. I can feel it. As they drove to the courthouse, Leah noticed the black sedan following them again. 3 cars back, maintaining constant distance. Professional surveillance. The courtroom was even more crowded than yesterday. Word had spread about the teenage lawyer who'd caught Reynolds' Dynamic Solutions in a lie. Delaney sat at the defense table, looking unusually pleased with himself. Judge Grayson called the court to order, and Delaney rose. Your Honor, the defense calls Mark Peterson. Peterson walked to the witness stand, not meeting Leah's eyes. She noticed his hands trembling slightly as he was sworn in. Mr. Peterson, Delaney began smoothly, could you tell the court about your conversation with Diana Brooks on March 15th? Peterson glanced at Leah, then quickly away. She asked me to help her falsify documents about the foundation's payments. Said we could both make money by threatening to expose the company. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Diana's face went white with shock. Objection, Leah was on her feet instantly. Your Honor, this testimony directly contradicts Mr. Peterson's sworn statement during discovery. Your Honor, Delaney countered. Mr. Peterson has come forward voluntarily to correct his previous statement, which he now admits was coerced by the plaintiff's daughter. Judge Grayson's expression darkened. Ms. Brooks approached the bench. Mr. Delaney, you too. As Leah walked forward, she caught Sandra's eye in the gallery. The older woman gave a slight nod. They'd prepared for something like this. The real battle was about to begin. Rain pounded against the windows of the Brooks apartment as Leah climbed the stairs, her messenger bag heavy with court documents. The day's grueling session had run late, and darkness had already settled over the city. She fumbled for her keys, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. The lock turned smoothly, too smoothly. Her newly installed deadbolt should have caught, twice. Heart pounding, she pushed the door open slowly, immediately noticing the shift in the air. Someone had been here. Mom? She called out, knowing Diana was working a late shift at the diner. No answer. Leah flipped on the lights and her breath caught in her throat. Their makeshift legal office had been systematically ransacked. File boxes were overturned, papers scattered across the floor. Her laptop was missing, along with several crucial folders containing witness statements and financial records. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone to call Diana, then stopped. If someone had broken in, they might be monitoring their calls. Instead, she texted, "Working late at library. Everything okay?" The response came quickly. "Just started my break. Be safe." Leah began assessing the damage, her mind racing. The most damaging evidence had been in those missing folders. Documents proving Reynolds had falsified their charitable foundation records, witness statements about corporate retaliation, and the mysterious emails they'd received about her father's accident. A movement outside the window caught her eye. Through the rain-streaked glass, she glimpsed a dark figure in a parked car, watching the building. The same black sedan she'd noticed following them to court. Her phone buzzed. Sandra Mercer. "Don't talk, just listen," Sandra said, when Leah answered. "They're desperate after Peterson's testimony backfired. Take only what you absolutely need and get out, now." "But the evidence isn't all gone," Sandra interrupted. "Check your father's old laptop, the one in his briefcase." Leah hurried to her bedroom closet, where she kept James Brooks's weathered briefcase. Inside, beneath a stack of legal pads, sat his old laptop. She hadn't touched it in years, assuming it was outdated and useless. The battery was dead, but when she plugged it in, the screen flickered to life. A password prompt appeared. Leah's fingers hovered over the keys, then typed, "Justice is not a gift." The first part of the inscription from his pocket watch. The desktop loaded, revealing dozens of encrypted folders. One was labeled simply RDS, Reynolds Dynamic Solutions. Inside were backups of everything she'd lost, along with files she'd never seen before. "Your father knew they might come after his work," Sandra explained over the phone. "He kept copies of everything. I've been updating the backup drive remotely ever since I started sending you documents." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Plausible deniability. If they questioned you about the source of the evidence, your reactions had to be genuine. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside their apartment. Leah froze, listening intently. "Get out," Sandra urged. "Use the fire escape. I'll meet you at the usual place." Leah quickly transferred essential files to a secure drive, then shoved her father's laptop and remaining documents into his briefcase. The footsteps outside grew closer. She eased open the window facing the fire escape, cringing at every small sound. The rain had intensified, making the metal stairs slippery and treacherous. As she climbed out, she heard their apartment door opening. Descending as quietly as possible, Leah kept to the shadows. 4 stories below, a police car cruised past, its lights off. Not a routine patrol. When she reached the ground, she stuck to back alleys, avoiding main streets. The black sedan pulled away from its watching position, but Leah had already slipped into the darkness between buildings. 20 minutes later, she arrived at Sandra's designated meeting spot, a 24-hour diner 10 blocks from the courthouse. Sandra sat in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. "They're getting sloppy," Sandra said as Leah slid into the booth, water dripping from her rain-soaked clothes. "Breaking in like that, leaving obvious signs. They're scared." "Because of what's on this?" Leah placed her father's laptop on the table. Sandra nodded. James was building a RICO case against Reynolds before he died. The charitable foundation wasn't just hiding fraudulent payments, it was laundering money for something much bigger. "What do you mean, bigger?" "Your father discovered Reynolds was part of a larger network of companies involved in systematic fraud. The foundation was just one piece of the puzzle." Sandra pulled out a thumb drive. "This contains the rest of his investigation, including what he found the week before his accident." Leah's hand shook as she took the drive. "Why did you wait until now to give me this?" "Because now they've shown their hand. Peterson's false testimony, the break-in. They're reacting out of fear, making mistakes. But it also means you're in real danger." The diner's bell chimed as new customers entered. Both women tensed, but it was just a tired-looking couple seeking late-night coffee. "We need to get ahead of them," Leah said, opening her father's laptop again. "If Peterson lied about my mother asking him to falsify documents, there must be evidence proving he's corrupt." Sandra sipped her coffee. "Check the foundation's payment records from 2022. Peterson's wife suddenly received a consulting fee right after Diana was fired." Leah found the transaction buried in a maze of shell company transfers. "Got it. But will Judge Grayson accept evidence from an anonymous source?" "It's not anonymous anymore." Sandra pulled out a notarized affidavit. "I'm officially coming forward as a witness. They can't bury this if it's presented in open court. They'll come after you. They already did 5 years ago. That's why I left Reynolds." Sandra's expression hardened. "I should have stood with your father then. I won't make the same mistake twice." Leah's phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Home now. Place is a mess. Where are you?" "I should go," Leah said, gathering her things. "Mom needs to know what's happening. Be careful. They'll be watching your apartment now." "Let them watch," Leah replied, a plan forming in her mind. "Tomorrow in court we're going to give them something worth seeing." The next morning, Leah arrived at the courthouse early, her father's briefcase laden with revelations. Diana sat in the gallery, worry lines creasing her face. Sandra had entered through a side door, avoiding attention until her testimony. William Delaney strutted in, his usual smirk firmly in place. "I hope you've had time to reconsider your position," he said quietly as he passed Leah's table. "It would be a shame if more of your evidence went missing." Leah met his gaze steadily. "Funny you should mention missing evidence, Mr. Delaney. I have some interesting documents to share about that." Before he could respond, Judge Grayson entered, and the day's session began. Mark Peterson returned to the stand for cross-examination, looking far less confident than the day before. "Mr. Peterson," Leah began, approaching the witness stand, "you testified yesterday that my mother asked you to help falsify documents about the foundation's payments. Is that correct?" "Yes," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "And you claimed I coerced your original statement supporting my mother. When exactly did this alleged coercion take place?" Peterson glanced at Delaney. "During my deposition, 3 weeks ago." "Interesting." Leah produced a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter Plaintiff's Exhibit 47 into evidence. This is a bank statement from Allied Financial showing a payment of $50,000 to Catherine Peterson, the witness's wife, dated 1 week ago." "Objection," Delaney shot to his feet. "Relevance? Goes to witness credibility and potential corruption, Your Honor." Judge Grayson examined the document. "I'll allow it. Continue, Ms. Brooks." "Mr. Peterson, can you explain why your wife received a consulting fee from a subsidiary of Reynolds Dynamic Solutions just days before you changed your testimony?" Sweat beaded on Peterson's forehead. I don't know anything about that payment." "Really? Because I also have emails between you and Thomas Thompson discussing this Consulting fee in detail. Leah produced another document. Would you like to revise your testimony about who actually attempted to bribe whom? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Peterson's face had gone pale, and Delaney was frantically whispering to his junior attorneys. Your Honor, Delaney stood. May we request a brief recess? Denied, Judge Grayson replied sharply. Ms. Brooks, continue your cross-examination. Leah pressed forward relentlessly, dismantling Peterson's false testimony piece by piece. With each question, his earlier confidence crumbled further. One final question, Mr. Peterson. Did anyone from Reynolds Dynamic Solutions suggest there might be negative consequences if you didn't change your testimony? Peterson broke. They said they'd audit my wife's business, find problems with her taxes. We couldn't afford that kind of trouble. No further questions, Leah said quietly. Judge Grayson's expression was thunderous. Mr. Delaney, given this revelation of witness tampering, would you care to explain yourself? Before Delaney could respond, Sandra Mercer stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, I have direct evidence of systematic witness intimidation by Reynolds Dynamic Solutions, and I'm prepared to testify. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Delaney's face had turned an alarming shade of red as he shouted objections. Judge Grayson banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Ms. Brooks, he said once quiet was restored, I assume you can authenticate Ms. Mercer's credentials? Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Mercer was senior legal counsel for Reynolds Dynamic Solutions until 2020. She has first-hand knowledge of the company's tactics and documentation to support her claims. Delaney leaned across the aisle. If Mercer testifies, certain parties will be very disappointed. Parties who might revisit the investigation of your father's accident. Leah felt a chill run down her spine but kept her voice steady. Are you threatening me in open court, Mr. Delaney? Of course not, he replied smoothly. Simply expressing concern for your family's well-being. Judge Grayson called Sandra to the stand, and the real bombshells began to fall. She testified about systematic corruption within Reynolds, about witness intimidation and document destruction, about the real purpose of the charitable foundation. But it was her final revelation that silenced the courtroom completely. The accident that killed James Brooks wasn't random, Sandra stated clearly. I have evidence proving Reynolds ordered his brake lines cut after he discovered where the foundation's money was really going. Diana gasped audibly. Leah gripped the edge of her table, fighting to maintain composure as Sandra continued. James Brooks didn't know I had copied his files before he died. I've been gathering additional evidence ever since, waiting for the right moment to come forward. That moment is now. Judge Grayson called an immediate recess, ordering both legal teams to his chambers. As bailiffs cleared the courtroom, Leah noticed Delaney making urgent phone calls, his usual confidence shattered. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them once again, but this time, Sandra stepped forward to make a statement. As she began describing Reynolds' corruption to the cameras, Leah spotted the black sedan driving past. The window lowered slightly, and she caught a glimpse of a familiar face, someone she'd seen in her father's old photographs. The pieces were finally falling into place. This wasn't just about her mother's wrongful termination anymore. This was about finishing what her father had started, about exposing a conspiracy that had already claimed one life. As rain began to fall again, Leah opened her father's pocket watch, reading the full inscription. Justice is not a gift, but a fight worth having. The real fight was just beginning. Thunder rolled across the city as Leah sat in her father's old office chair, surrounded by the ghosts of memories. The trial had recessed for the day following Sandra's bombshell testimony, and she'd retreated to the one place where she always felt closest to him, his home office, preserved exactly as he'd left it 5 years ago. Rain tapped against the window as she ran her fingers over the worn leather armrests, remembering countless evenings spent here as a child. The old mahogany desk still held his legal books, case files, and the brass nameplate. James Brooks, attorney at law. I thought I'd find you here, Diana said softly from the doorway. She carried 2 mugs of hot chocolate, their old tradition, for difficult days. Leah accepted the mug, breathing in the familiar comfort. I was 12 when he first taught me about cross-examination, she said, gazing at the mock courtroom diagram they'd drawn together on his whiteboard. It was still there, the markers faded but visible. We'd act out trials right here in this office. Diana settled into the room's other chair, her eyes distant with memories. You were so young, but you understood everything he taught you. The way your eyes lit up when he explained legal strategies. He used to say you were born for the courtroom. I remember this case, Leah said, pulling an old file from the shelf. Martinez vs. Western Electric. Dad was representing a whistleblower who'd discovered safety violations. I helped him practice his opening statement. You did more than that, Diana smiled. You found the key piece of evidence, a discrepancy in the inspection dates that everyone else had missed. Leah opened the file, her father's handwriting jumping out from the yellowed pages. His notes were meticulous, each argument carefully constructed, every possible counter-argument anticipated, just like he'd taught her. The night before the Martinez trial, Leah recalled, he sat me down right here and said something I never forgot. He said, "Baby girl, being a lawyer isn't about winning cases. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're scared, even when the odds are against you." Diana wiped away a tear. He would be so proud of you, Leah. The way you've handled this case, how you stood up to Delaney. I should have seen it sooner, Leah said, her voice tight with emotion. The connection between Dad's accident and Reynolds. All those times he worked late, the worried looks, the phone calls he'd taken private. He was building a case against them, wasn't he? He never told me details, Diana admitted. Said it was safer if I didn't know. But in those last few weeks he was different, tense. He started keeping documents in a safety deposit box, made copies of everything. Leah pulled out her father's pocket watch, the gold surface gleaming in the dim light. The day he died, he was supposed to pick me up from debate practice. When he didn't show, I just thought he was caught up in court. Diana moved to kneel beside her daughter's chair. Listen to me, Leah. What happened to your father wasn't your fault. None of this is your fault. But if I'd known what he was investigating, if I'd understood the danger. You were 12, Diana said firmly. James made his choices to protect people just like you're doing now. But I need you to understand something. I can't lose you too. Leah met her mother's eyes. That's why you didn't want me taking this case, isn't it? You knew how dangerous Reynolds could be. When you first said you wanted to represent me, all I could think about was your father. The same determination in your eyes, the same fearlessness. Diana's voice cracked. I tried to shield you from our struggles after he died. The bills, the debt collectors, the nights I cried myself to sleep. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just underestimating you. Thunder crashed closer as Leah stood, walking to the window. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass. Dad used to say that justice doesn't come easy. That's why so many people give up fighting for it. She turned back to her mother. Remember that summer when he took me to court every day? I was 13, and he was handling the Johnson discrimination case. He let me help prepare witnesses, organize exhibits. You barely slept that whole month, Diana smiled, too excited about learning trial procedures. One witness was terrified about testifying, Leah continued. Dad spent hours helping her feel comfortable, practicing her testimony, teaching her breathing exercises for anxiety. When she finally took the stand, she was rock solid. That's when I knew I wanted to be exactly like him. A knock at the front door made them both freeze. Diana moved to answer it, but Leah held up a hand, remembering Sandra's warnings about caution. She checked the security camera they'd installed. It was Sandra herself, looking more agitated than usual. We need to talk, Sandra said, as soon as they let her in. She was soaking wet from the rain, her usual composure rattled. I found something in the old case files, something James wanted you to have, Leah. She pulled out a sealed envelope, the paper yellowed with age. On the front, in her father's handwriting, was a simple instruction. For Leah, when the time comes. With trembling fingers, Leah opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a small key. My dearest Leah, she read aloud, her father's voice echoing in her memory. If you're reading this, Then my worst fears have come true, and I didn't make it to the end of this fight. But knowing you, knowing your heart and your brilliant mind, I suspect you've already found your way to the truth." Diana moved closer, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders as she continued reading. "The key enclosed opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 1247. Inside, you'll find everything I discovered about Reynolds Dynamic Solutions and their criminal enterprise. I couldn't risk keeping it all in one place, but I made sure it would be safe until you were ready." Leah paused, fighting back tears. "How did you know?" she whispered to the letter. "How did you know I'd end up here?" "Keep reading," Sandra urged gently. "From the first time I saw you argue a point at the dinner table, citing evidence and making your case like a natural-born lawyer, I knew you had a gift, not just for the law, but for justice itself. You see the world the way it should be, and you have the courage to fight for that vision." Thunder rumbled again as Leah read on. "The night before my accident, I almost told you everything. You were helping me prepare for what I thought would be the biggest case of my career. But I decided to protect you instead. Now I realize that might have been a mistake. You're stronger than anyone knows, Leah. You always have been." Diana wiped tears from her cheeks as her daughter's voice grew stronger. "If you're reading this, it means you've discovered what Reynolds really is. Not just a corrupt corporation, but a criminal organization hiding behind legitimate business. The evidence in that safety deposit box will prove everything, but be careful. These people will stop at nothing to keep their secrets." "James knew," Sandra said quietly. "He knew they were going to come after him, so he made sure the truth would survive." Leah reached the final paragraph, her father's last words. To her, "My darling daughter, I don't know what battles you'll face by the time you read this, but I know you'll face them with the same courage and conviction that made me proud every single day of your life. Remember what I taught you. Justice isn't about winning cases. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're scared, even when the odds are against you. I love you more than words can say. Trust yourself, trust the truth, and never stop fighting for justice. Love, Dad." The room fell silent, except for the sound of rain against the windows. Leah carefully folded the letter, holding it close to her heart. "The bank opens at 9 tomorrow, Sandra said. "I'll go with you. There's more evidence against Reynolds in that box than they ever imagined. They'll try to stop us," Diana worried. "Let them try," Leah replied, her voice steady despite her tears. "Dad didn't give up, and neither will we." She moved to her father's desk, running her fingers over the smooth wood. The drawer still stuck slightly on the right side, just as it had when she was small. Inside, she found his old trial notebook, filled with strategies and insights gleaned from years of fighting for justice. "Sandra," Leah said, turning to face her father's former colleague, "there's something I need to know. Why did you disappear after his death? Why wait until now to come forward?" Sandra sank into a chair, her expression haunted. "I was a coward," she admitted. "When James first showed me what he'd discovered about Reynolds, I wanted to help. But after the accident, I knew it wasn't really an accident. But I couldn't prove it. They made it clear the same thing would happen to anyone who kept digging." "So you ran," Diana said, not accusingly. "I ran," Sandra nodded. "But I never stopped gathering evidence. Every document, every witness statement, every piece of proof James had collected. I kept copies of everything. I've spent 5 years building on his work, waiting for the right moment, the right person to finish what he started." "And you think that person is me?" Leah asked. Sandra smiled sadly. "James always said you were the best lawyer he'd ever met, and you were only a child then. He knew somehow that you'd be the one to bring them down. That's why he left everything to you." Leah opened her father's trial notebook, finding a page marked with his favorite quote. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." "Tomorrow morning," she said, determination replacing grief in her voice. "We get that. Evidence. Then we're going to do exactly what Dad wanted, expose Reynolds for what they really are. It won't be easy," Sandra warned. "Once they realize what's in that safety deposit box, they'll come at us with everything they have." "Good," Leah replied, picking up her father's pocket watch. Because I'm done being afraid of them. I'm done letting them hurt people I love. Tomorrow we show them what happens when they mess with James Brooks's daughter. Diana wrapped her arms around Leah, holding her close. Whatever happens, we face it together, just like your father would have wanted. Through the window, the storm began to ease, the thunder growing distant. Leah looked around her father's office, at the books he'd taught her from, the desk where she'd learned to argue cases, the whiteboard where they'd planned trial strategies together. You know what Dad would say right now? She asked, a small smile forming through her tears. Time to get to work, Diana and Sandra replied in unison. Leah nodded, already pulling out her legal pad. They had evidence to review, strategies to plan, and justice to fight for. James Brooks's final case was about to reach its conclusion, finished by the daughter he'd trained for this moment without even knowing it. Outside, the rain finally stopped, and a sliver of moonlight broke through the clouds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new battles. But tonight, in her father's office, surrounded by his memory and his mission, Leah Brooks was exactly where she needed to be. The abandoned parking garage echoed with the sound of footsteps as Leah waited in the shadows of level B2. Sandra had arranged this meeting through secure channels, insisting on extreme precautions. The whistleblower would only meet here, away from surveillance cameras and prying eyes. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the stairwell, a man in his 50s, wearing a worn jacket and carrying a leather messenger bag. Paul Davidson, former chief financial officer of Reynolds Dynamic Solutions, now living under an assumed name in another state. Ms. Brooks, he said quietly, staying near the exit. Sandra told me about your father. I worked with him, you know, before. They killed him, Leah finished. The words still felt raw in her throat. Paul nodded, glancing nervously at the shadows. I should have come forward then. But after what happened to James, well, I had a family to think about. But you're here now, Leah said. Why? He opened his messenger bag, removing a flash drive and a stack of documents. Because it's gotten worse. The foundation isn't just laundering money anymore. They're using it to fund something terrible, something James was close to exposing when they stopped him. Sandra emerged from her watching position, moving to join them. Tell her everything, Paul. She needs to know what she's really fighting. Paul's hands trembled as he handed over the flash drive. It's all here. Emails, contracts, financial statements. Reynolds has been using the Children's Foundation as a front for years, channeling money through shell companies and fake charitable programs. We know about the fraud, Leah said, but Paul shook his head. This goes beyond fraud. The foundation is connected to a network of corporations involved in illegal weapons development, unauthorized medical testing, political bribery. James found the first thread, but it leads to something much bigger. Leah's mind raced, connecting pieces of her father's investigation with this new information. That's why they moved so quickly to silence him. And why they came after your mother when she started asking questions, Sandra added. Diana accidentally stumbled onto the same evidence James had found. Paul kept glancing toward the exit, his anxiety palpable. I can testify about everything, but you have to protect me. If they find out I'm talking, no one will know you're our source, Leah assured him. We can introduce you as a corporate compliance expert initially. Keep your whistleblower status secret until the right moment. They'll try to discredit me, Paul warned. They have files on everyone who's ever worked for Reynolds. They'll dig up anything they can use. Leah thought of Mark Peterson's false testimony, how quickly Reynolds had turned him. Let them try. Your testimony, combined with these documents and my father's evidence. A car horn blared somewhere above them, making Paul jump. We need to go. I've written everything down. Names, dates, account numbers. The password for the encrypted files is Phoenix Rising. Be careful who you trust with this information. Paul hurried back to the stairwell. Sandra touched Leah's arm. We should move quickly. Once we present this evidence in court, Reynolds will know someone talked. Back at Sandra's apartment, they began reviewing the files from Paul's flash drive. The scope of Reynolds' corruption was staggering. The Children's Foundation was just one piece of a vast criminal enterprise, carefully hidden behind layers of legitimate business. "Look at this," Leah said, pointing to her laptop screen. Every time the foundation made a payment to these fake consulting firms, an identical amount was transferred to offshore accounts controlled by shell companies.
Sandra leaned in, examining the transaction records. Classic money laundering, but the amounts millions of dollars every month. What could they be funding? They worked through them, organizing the evidence and
planning their strategy. By dawn, they had built a clear timeline connecting Reynolds's illegal activities to Diana's termination and James's death. "We need to be careful how we present this," Sandra cautioned as they gathered their materials. "If we show too much too soon, they'll bury us in motions and delays." "No," Leah replied, her father's determination burning in her eyes. "We hit them hard and fast. Once Paul testifies, we release everything. No more hiding, no more fear." In court that morning, William Delaney seemed unusually confident as he approached the bench. "Your Honor, the defense calls Mark Peterson for redirect examination." Leah tensed, but Sandra squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. They had anticipated this move. "Mr. Peterson," Delaney began smoothly, "you previously testified about Mrs. Brooks, asking you to falsify documents. Would you like to expand on that testimony?" Peterson shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Leah. "Actually, Your Honor, I need to correct my previous statement. I was pressured to lie about Mrs. Brooks. The truth is, she never asked me to falsify anything." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Delaney's face darkened. "Mr. Peterson, may I remind you that you are under oath?" "That's why I'm telling the truth now," Peterson replied, his voice stronger. "Reynolds threatened my family, forced me to give false testimony. I have proof." Before Delaney could object, Leah stood. "Your Honor, in light of this revelation, the plaintiff calls Paul Davidson to the stand." "Objection!" Delaney shouted. "This witness wasn't on the plaintiff's list." "Your Honor, Mr. Davidson is an expert in corporate compliance," Leah responded calmly. "His testimony is directly relevant to the pattern of corruption we've established." Judge Grayson studied both attorneys before nodding. "I'll allow it. Mr. Davidson, please take the stand." Paul walked to the witness box, his professional demeanor masking his earlier nervousness. As he was sworn in, Leah noticed Delaney frantically, whispering to his junior attorneys. "Mr. Davidson, could you state your credentials for the court?" Leah began. "I hold an MBA in finance and spent 15 years as chief financial officer for major corporations, including Reynolds Dynamic Solutions, from 2018 to 2023. Delaney's head snapped up at this revelation. His face paled as he realized who was actually on the stand. "During your time at Reynolds, did you observe any irregular financial practices involving the company's charitable foundation?" "Objection, Your Honor," Delaney interrupted. "This line of questioning goes beyond the scope of the wrongful termination claim." "Your Honor," Leah countered, "the foundation's activities are directly connected to my mother's termination. She was fired for discovering exactly what Mr. Davidson is about to describe." "Overruled," Judge Grayson declared. "Continue, Ms. Brooks." Paul straightened in his chair. "Yes, I observed numerous irregularities. The foundation was being used to launder money through fake consulting firms and offshore accounts." "Could you be more specific about these irregularities?" "The foundation would make payments to shell companies for non-existent services. These companies would then transfer the money through multiple accounts before it reached its final destination, accounts controlled by individuals involved in illegal activities." Delaney stood again. "Your Honor, I move to strike this testimony. The witness is making unfounded accusations." "I have proof," Paul interrupted, reaching for his briefcase. "Financial records, emails, contracts, everything showing how Reynolds used the foundation to hide illegal transactions." Judge Grayson leaned forward. "Mr. Davidson, are you willing to submit these documents as evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor. And I'm also prepared to testify about how Reynolds systematically silences anyone who discovers these activities." including what happened to James Brooks. The courtroom fell silent. Leah could feel her heart pounding as she approached the witness stand with the flash drive and documents. Your Honor, we move to enter these records into evidence as Plaintiff's Exhibits 72 through 89. They demonstrate not only the Foundation's illegal activities, but also the direct connection between my mother's termination and her discovery of this fraud. As the documents were distributed, Delaney's team scrambled to review them. Their confident demeanor crumbled as they realized the extent of what Paul had revealed. Mr. Davidson, Leah continued, could you explain what happened when employees questioned these irregular transactions? They were immediately terminated, often under false pretenses. If they persisted in asking questions, more severe measures were taken. Paul's voice grew quieter. James Brooks was investigating these same activities when he died in what was made to look like a car accident. Delaney shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. The witness is suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, Paul interrupted firmly. I'm stating facts supported by evidence. Reynolds Dynamic Solutions had James Brooks killed because he discovered their criminal enterprise. When Diana Brooks found similar evidence, they tried to silence her too. The gallery erupted in shocked murmurs. Judge Grayson banged his gavel, repeatedly calling for order. Mr. Davidson, Leah asked once quiet was restored, why have you chosen to come forward now? Paul looked directly at Delaney as he answered, because I can't live with the guilt anymore. I was there when they planned James Brooks's accident. I saw what they did to silence him. When I heard his daughter was fighting the same battle, I couldn't stay quiet any longer. During the lunch recess, Sandra pulled Leah aside in an empty conference room. They're panicking. Delaney's been on the phone nonstop since Paul's testimony began. Good, Leah replied, reviewing her notes for the afternoon session. Let them panic. We're not done yet. Be careful, Sandra warned. They're most dangerous when they're desperate. When court resumed, Delaney launched an aggressive cross-examination, trying to discredit Paul's testimony. Mr. Davidson, isn't it true that you were terminated from Reynolds for embezzlement? No, Paul replied calmly. That was the official story they created after I questioned the Foundation's activities, just like they tried to discredit Diana Brooks. Do you have any proof of these alleged illegal activities besides the documents you claim are authentic? Yes, Paul said, producing more papers from his briefcase. I kept detailed records of everything, including meetings where these activities were discussed. I also recorded conversations with Reynolds executives who explicitly threatened employees who asked too many questions. Delaney's face reddened. Your Honor, these recordings would be inadmissible. Actually, Leah interrupted. Under state law, recording conversations related to criminal activities is permitted when one party consents. Mr. Davidson was a participant in these conversations. Judge Grayson nodded. The recordings will be allowed, subject to proper authentication. As Paul's testimony continued, the full scope of Reynolds's corruption emerged. The Children's Foundation had been used to funnel millions of dollars into illegal weapons development, unauthorized medical testing, and political bribes. Diana's discovery of the irregular payments had threatened to expose the entire operation. One final question, Leah said, approaching the witness stand. Mr. Davidson, what convinced you to risk everything by testifying today? Paul looked at her thoughtfully. Your father was a good man, Ms. Brooks. He fought for justice even when he knew it might cost him everything. When I saw you doing the same thing, I realized I couldn't hide from the truth any longer. As Paul stepped down, Delaney conferred urgently with his team. The evidence was overwhelming, and they knew it. Reynolds's carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, shouting questions about the revelations. Leah guided her mother through the crowd, while Sandra helped Paul slip away unnoticed. That evening, as they reviewed the day's testimony, Leah received an anonymous text. Watch your back. This isn't over, she showed the message to Sandra, who nodded grimly. They'll try something desperate now. We need to protect Paul. We need to protect everyone, Leah replied, thinking of her father. No more innocent people die because of Reynolds's crimes. The next morning's newspapers carried headlines about Paul's testimony and Reynolds' corruption. As Leah prepared for another day in court, she knew the real battle was just beginning. Reynolds wouldn't go down without a fight, but neither would she. Justice was finally within reach, not just for her mother, but for her father and everyone else Reynolds had hurt. The truth was out, and no amount of corporate power could hide it anymore. The apartment was dark when Leah returned home after a grueling day in court. She reached for the light switch, then froze. Something was wrong. The air felt different, disturbed. Her hand moved to her phone instead. The beam from her phone's flashlight revealed their worst fears. Crude messages covered the walls in red. Paint, drop the case or else, and you'll end up like your father. Papers were strewn everywhere, furniture overturned, and her laptop was smashed on the floor. "Mom?" Leah called out, heart racing. No answer. She dialed Diana's number with trembling fingers. "Leah?" Diana answered on the first ring. "Thank God. I'm at the diner picking up an extra shift. What's wrong?" "Stay there," Leah said firmly. "Someone broke in. I'm calling Sandra." Sandra arrived within 15 minutes, followed by 2 trusted police officers she'd worked with during her time at Reynolds. As they documented the vandalism, Sandra pulled Leah aside. "This is just the beginning," she warned. "After Paul's testimony yesterday, they're desperate. We need to move you and Diana somewhere safe." Leah surveyed the destruction, her father's words echoing in her mind. Sometimes the ones who fight hardest against justice are the ones who fear it most. "We're not running," she declared, picking up a torn legal brief from the floor. "That's what they want, to scare us into silence." Officer Martinez approached with a grim expression. No signs of forced entry. They either had a key or picked the locks professionally. This wasn't random vandalism. "Of course it wasn't," Leah replied, photographing the threatening messages. "Reynolds is sending us a message." Diana arrived despite Leah's protests, gasping at the destruction. "All your case files." "Backed up in 3 separate locations," Leah assured her. "After what happened to Dad's evidence, I wasn't taking any chances." As they cleaned up the apartment, Leah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You'll want to see this before tomorrow's hearing." The email contained a single video file. Leah opened it on Sandra's secure laptop, and her blood ran cold. It was surveillance footage of Paul meeting with Delaney 3 days ago, before his testimony. "It could be doctored," Sandra said, but her voice held doubt. "Only one way to find out," Leah replied, dialing Paul's number. No answer. They tried his hotel room next. The clerk informed them Mr. Davidson had checked out an hour ago, leaving no forwarding information. "He played us," Leah realized, anger rising in her throat. "The whole time he was working with them." Sandra shook her head. "Not the whole time. His evidence about Reynolds is real. I verified it myself. They must have gotten to him after he came forward." The next morning, Leah arrived at court early, her mind racing with contingency plans. The gallery was already packed with reporters and spectators drawn by yesterday's dramatic testimony. Delaney strutted in, looking remarkably pleased with himself. "Rough night, Ms. Brooks. I heard about the break-in. Such a shame. Criminals these days have no respect for property." Before Leah could respond, Judge Grayson entered. "Be seated. Mr. Delaney, I understand you have a motion to present?" "Yes, Your Honor." Delaney rose smoothly. "The defense moves to suppress all evidence and testimony provided by Paul Davidson on the grounds that it was obtained through coercion and manufactured specifically to damage Reynolds' reputation." "Objection." Leah stood. "This is a desperate attempt to discredit a whistleblower. A whistleblower who has now signed an affidavit admitting he was paid to provide false testimony," Delaney interrupted, producing a document with Paul's signature. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Grayson called for order, studying the affidavit carefully. "Ms. Brooks, were you aware of this development?" "No, Your Honor," Leah admitted. "But I can prove the evidence Mr. Davidson provided is authentic, regardless of any pressure he may now be under to recant." "Your Honor," Delaney continued, We also moved to suppress any evidence related to James Brooks's accident. The plaintiff's attempts to connect a 5-year-old tragedy to this case are purely emotional manipulation. Leah felt her temper rising, but kept her voice steady. The connection is clear and supported by evidence, Your Honor. Reynolds's pattern of silencing whistleblowers is inadmissible speculation, Delaney cut in. Furthermore, we've discovered that Ms. Brooks has been illegally recording conversations with potential witnesses. That's a lie, is it? Delaney produced another document. We have sworn statements from 3 individuals claiming you pressured them to testify falsely against Reynolds. Judge Grayson's expression darkened. Ms. Brooks, these are serious allegations. Do you have any response? Leah's mind raced. They were trying to destroy her credibility, just as they'd done to her father, but she had one card left to play. Your Honor, I call Sandra Mercer to the stand. Delaney's smirk faltered slightly. This wasn't part of his script. Sandra took the stand, her posture rigid but confident. Ms. Mercer, Leah began, could you explain your role in gathering evidence against Reynolds' Dynamic Solutions? Objection, Delaney interrupted. Ms. Mercer's testimony about events from years ago goes directly to the heart of this case, Leah finished. The same corruption she documented then led directly to my mother's termination. Judge Grayson considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but stay focused on the current case, Ms. Brooks. Sandra described how she'd systematically gathered evidence of Reynolds's illegal activities, including the real purpose of the charitable foundation. She explained how the company silenced whistleblowers through threats, bribes, and worse. And what happened to employees who couldn't be bought or intimidated? Leah asked. Objection calls for speculation. I'm not speculating, Sandra replied firmly. I was in the room when they discussed eliminating James Brooks. They called it resolving a liability. The courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Grayson leaned forward, his attention fully focused. They're using the same playbook now, Sandra continued. The break-in at Leah's apartment, the threats, forcing Paul to recant. It's all part of their standard operation. Delaney stood, his face flushed. Your Honor, this testimony is supported by extensive documentation, Leah interrupted, producing a new set of files. Sandra didn't just gather evidence about past crimes. She recorded everything Reynolds did after my mother's termination, including their attempts to obstruct justice in this case. As the new evidence was distributed, Leah noticed one of Delaney's junior attorneys slip out of the courtroom, phone pressed to his ear. The morning recess arrived, and Sandra pulled Leah aside. They'll come after me next. I've already arranged for everything I know to be released to major news outlets if anything happens to me. We need to protect Diana, Leah realized. If they're this desperate. But when she tried calling her mother, there was no answer. The diner said she hadn't shown up for her shift. Panic rising, Leah rushed out of the courthouse, Sandra close behind. They found Diana's car in the parking lot, her purse still on the seat, her phone showing missed calls from an unknown number. This was their plan all along, Sandra said grimly. Push us into a corner, then take away the one thing you can't risk losing. Leah's phone buzzed, a text from the same unknown number. Smart girl, now let's discuss terms. We can't go to the police, Sandra warned. Reynolds has too many connections. No, Leah agreed, her father's determination burning in her eyes. But we can give them exactly what they want, while getting what we need. She replied to the text. Name the time and place. The response came quickly. Parking garage, level B2, 1 hour, come alone. It's a trap, Sandra protested. Of course it is, Leah replied, already formulating a plan. But they don't know what we have planned either. While Sandra made calls to trusted contacts, Leah reviewed everything they knew about Reynolds' operation. The pattern was clear. They never left loose ends. They won't let any of us walk away, she realized. Even if I drop the case, they can't risk what we know. Just like with your father, Sandra agreed. So we give them a bigger problem to worry about. Leah arrived at the parking garage exactly on time, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. Level Sabo. B2 was dark, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously. A figure emerged from the shadows, not Delaney, but Thomas Thompson, Diana's former supervisor. "Hello, Leah. I was hoping we could resolve this situation professionally." "Where's my, mother?" "Safe for now. She'll remain that way if you cooperate." Thompson's voice was calm, reasonable. "All you have to do is withdraw the case, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and this all goes away." "Like it went away for my father?" Thompson's expression hardened. "James made his choice. Don't make the same mistake." "You're right," Leah replied, reaching into her bag. "I won't." She produced a laptop, opening it to reveal a live stream. "Wave to the cameras, Mr. Thompson. Your confession is being broadcast to every major news outlet right now." His face paled. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Sandra's been gathering evidence for years. Did you really think she worked alone?" Leah's voice grew stronger. "Everything you've done, the fraud, the threats, my father's murder, it's all being exposed right now." Thompson reached for his phone, but Leah continued. "Go ahead, call your bosses. While you've been threatening my family, federal agents are executing search warrants at Reynolds' offices across the country. It's over." "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Thompson snarled, his professional demeanor cracking. "No, you don't understand. I'm not just fighting for my mother anymore. This is for every person Reynolds has hurt, every life they've destroyed. Now where is she?" A slow clap echoed through the garage. Sandra emerged from the shadows, followed by several armed FBI agents. "Well done, Leah. Mr. Thompson, I believe you have some explaining to do." Thompson's shoulders slumped as agents moved to arrest him. "The maintenance room," he muttered. "Second floor." Diana was found unharmed, though shaken. As mother and daughter embraced, Leah caught sight of Delaney being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs, reporters swarming around him. "How did you know?" Diana asked later, safe in their apartment with police protection outside. "I didn't," Leah admitted. "But Dad always said justice finds a way. We just had to be brave enough to keep fighting for it." Sandra joined them, bringing news from the courthouse. "Judge Grayson has denied all of Delaney's motions. The evidence stands, and Reynolds' entire board of directors is being indicted." "What about Paul?" Leah asked. "In protective custody?" Once, he realized Reynolds would never let him live. He agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. Leah touched her father's pocket watch, feeling the weight of everything they'd accomplished. "Dad would be proud," Diana said softly. "Not just of winning, but of how you won, by standing up for what's right." Outside, reporters still camped on their doorstep, eager for interviews about the teenager who brought down a corporate giant. But inside, Leah Brooks finally felt at peace. Justice had prevailed, not just for her family, but for everyone Reynolds had tried to silence. The fight wasn't completely over. There would be more battles ahead as the case moved forward. But they had struck a decisive blow against corruption, proving that even the most powerful entities couldn't escape justice forever. "What happens now?" Diana asked as they watched the evening news coverage of Reynolds' downfall. Leah smiled, thinking of all the other whistleblowers who might now find the courage to come forward. "Now we make sure this never happens to another family. Dad's legacy lives on through the truth we've exposed." Sandra raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To James Brooks, and to the daughter who finished what he started." "To justice," Leah added, softly, "and to all those who fight for it, no matter the cost." Late evening shadows stretched across James Brooks's home office as Leah sorted through his old case files. After the events at the parking garage, something Sandra had said kept nagging at her. James was looking into more than just the foundation. He found a connection we're still missing. A soft knock announced Sandra's arrival with coffee. "I had a feeling you'd be here," she said, settling into the spare chair. "Look at this." Leah held up a folder labeled RDS 2020, containing handwritten notes about seemingly unrelated cases, workplace accidents, environmental violations, defective products. Dad was tracking patterns across different Reynolds subsidiaries. He was building a RICO case, Sandra confirmed. Not just against Reynolds, but against everyone involved. As Leah reached for another file, her elbow knocked over a stack of papers. A small key fell from between the pages, different from the safety deposit box key. The initials, JBMD, were etched into the metal. Sandra's eyes widened. Maryland. James had a storage unit in Baltimore. He never told me what was in it, but that's where he was heading the day he died, Leah finished. The accident happened on the Baltimore highway. They drove through the night, avoiding main roads. The storage facility owner, an old friend of James, met them at the gate. Been wondering when someone would come for this, he said, leading them to Unit 247. James made me promise to keep it paid up, said someday his daughter would need what's inside. The unit contained recordings, photographs, and a laptop in a waterproof case. But it was the wall of connecting strings and photos that made them gasp. James had mapped out the entire Reynolds conspiracy, with lines connecting shell companies to offshore accounts, executives to suspicious deaths. At the center was a photograph of William Delaney shaking hands with a man Leah had never seen. That's Victor Reynolds, Sandra breathed. The founder's grandson. He's supposed to be dead. Supposed to be? Allegedly died in a boating accident in 2015, right before Reynolds started expanding their charitable operations. This photo was taken 2 months before your father died. The laptop powered on, accepting the familiar password. Justice is not a gift. Inside, they found recorded meetings, including one from the day before the accident. Delaney's voice filled the storage unit. You're making a serious mistake, James. Think about your family. About Leah. Would be a shame if something happened. Are you threatening my daughter, William? James's reply was steady. Victor doesn't like loose ends. The Foundation's operations are too important to risk exposure. You mean the weapons research, the illegal medical trials, or the bribes to keep regulators quiet? How much do you know? Enough to bring down your whole operation. It's all documented, all secured where you'll never find it. If anything happens to me or my family, everything goes public. Name your price. You still don't understand. This isn't about money, it's about justice. Leah gripped her father's pocket watch tightly. He died protecting us, she whispered. They killed him because he wouldn't back down. And because they thought his evidence died with him, Sandra added. But he made sure you'd find it when you were ready. As they documented everything, Leah's phone buzzed with a text. Like father, like daughter. Last chance to walk away. They're watching the facility, Sandra warned. Good. Let them watch. They're about to learn what happens when you threaten a Brooks. The next morning in court, Leah felt different. Her father's final evidence had given her certainty. When Delaney swaggered in, she met his gaze calmly. Something amusing, Ms. Brooks? Just wondering how Victor Reynolds is enjoying his retirement. The Cayman Islands, isn't it? The blood drained from his face as Judge Grayson entered. Your Honor, Leah stood. The plaintiff requests permission to present new evidence regarding Reynolds' illegal activities and their connection to James Brooks's death. Despite Delaney's objections, Leah presented the recordings, photographs, and James's detailed records. Sandra testified about the storage unit and the evidence chain. When Leah displayed the photograph of Delaney with Victor Reynolds, the attorney made for the exit, only to be arrested by waiting FBI agents. The recording of James's final conversation with Delaney played through the courtroom. When it finished, the silence was absolute. Your Honor, Leah said, this evidence proves that Reynolds Dynamic Solutions, through William Delaney and others, engaged in a criminal conspiracy that included my father's murder and the attempted silencing of my mother. Judge Grayson ordered all evidence provided to federal prosecutors and adjourned until Monday. That night, Leah found one last file on her father's laptop, a video dated the morning of his death. James Brooks appeared, on screen, tired but determined. Leah, if you're watching this, then things have gone the way I feared. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from this fight. But I know you, baby girl. I know your heart, your mind, your courage. You'll find your way to the truth because that's, who you are. I've left you everything you need to finish what I started. But the most important thing, you've had all along. The conviction that justice matters more than fear. I love you, Leah. I'm proud of you. And I know that whatever darkness you're facing, your light will shine through. Keep fighting. Keep believing. Justice is not just a word. It's a promise we make to each other, to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. Through her tears, Leah opened his pocket watch one final time, reading the inscription that had guided her journey. Justice is not a gift, but a fight worth having. We won, Dad, she whispered to the quiet office. We won. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows, illuminating a packed gallery. News of Victor Reynolds' arrest in the Cayman Islands had broken overnight, and reporters filled every available seat. Leah stood at the plaintiff's table, her father's pocket watch open before her, its steady ticking a reminder of how far they'd come. Diana sat in the front row, Sandra beside her. Paul Davidson had been moved to protective custody after agreeing to testify in the federal case. The evidence from James Brooks's storage unit had triggered investigations across 3 continents, exposing a web of corruption that stretched far beyond Reynolds' dynamic solutions. Judge Grayson entered, his expression grave. Be seated, he commanded. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances of this case. What began as a wrongful termination suit has exposed criminal activities that will be addressed in federal court. However, we are here today to conclude the matter before this court. Leah rose, her voice steady. Your Honor, given the evidence presented and Mr. Delaney's arrest, we request— Ms. Brooks, Judge Grayson interrupted, a slight smile touching his lips. I've read every document, reviewed every piece of evidence, and considered every argument. I don't need to hear any more. I'm prepared to render my decision. The courtroom fell silent. Leah felt her mother's hand squeeze her shoulder. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Judge Grayson declared. Reynolds Dynamic Solutions wrongfully terminated Diana Brooks in retaliation for discovering criminal activities. The company's subsequent attempts to obstruct justice and intimidate witnesses demonstrate a pattern of behavior that demands the strongest possible response. He paused, looking directly at Leah. Furthermore, the evidence connecting these events to James Brooks's death will be referred to federal prosecutors. Ms. Brooks, your father would be proud of how you've handled this case. You've demonstrated legal acumen well beyond your years. Grayson detailed the damages: full back pay for Diana, punitive damages for emotional distress and legal fees. But the monetary award seemed almost secondary now. The real victory was in the truth finally exposed. I have one more matter to address, Judge Grayson continued. Ms. Brooks, approach the bench. Leah moved forward, curious. The judge held up an envelope. The dean of Riverside Law School contacted me after following this case. They're offering you a full scholarship with early admission. You've more than proven your capabilities in this courtroom. Tears welled in Leah's eyes as she accepted the envelope. In the gallery, Diana was crying openly, while Sandra beamed with pride. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for interviews. This time, Leah stepped up to the microphones. Today isn't just about winning a case. It's about proving that justice can prevail, even against the most powerful opponents. My father died fighting for that principle, and his courage inspired us to keep fighting. Diana joined her daughter at the podium. James always said that justice isn't just about laws, it's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Leah embodied that spirit throughout this case. Sandra approached with breaking news on her phone. They found Victor Reynolds' files, the weapons research, the illegal trials, everything. The entire board of directors is being indicted. Later that evening, Diana surprised Leah with an announcement of her own. I'm starting a nonprofit organization, she explained, spreading plans across their kitchen table. We'll help whistleblowers and their families fight corporate retaliation. Sandra's agreed to be our legal advisor. The James Brooks Foundation for Corporate Justice, Leah read from the proposal, her heart swelling. And we need a student intern, Sandra added with a smile. Someone who can help between law school classes. The doorbell rang, It was Paul, escorted by federal agents. He looked tired but relieved. "I wanted to thank you personally," he told Leah. "Your courage gave me the strength to finally tell the truth. I'll be testifying against Reynolds' entire operation." "We're building a support network for witnesses," Diana explained, sharing her plans for the foundation. "People need to know they're not alone when they stand up to corruption." Paul nodded enthusiastically. "Count me in. Once the federal case is over, I want to help others come forward." That night, Leah sat in her father's office one last time before they converted it into the foundation's headquarters. She opened his laptop, finding the video message he'd left her. "I always knew you'd find your way to the truth." James's voice filled the room. "Not because I left you clues, but because you have the heart of a fighter and the mind of a lawyer. You see justice not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing thing worth fighting for." She touched the screen, tears falling freely. "We did it, Dad. We really did it." The next morning's newspapers carried headlines about Victor Reynolds' upcoming trial and the international investigation into his criminal network. But it was a smaller story that caught Leah's eye, an editorial titled, "The Legacy of James Brooks Lives On." Sandra arrived with coffee and fresh intelligence from her FBI contacts. "Delaney's cooperating fully. He's naming names, dates, everything. The whole house of cards is coming down." "Good," Leah said firmly. "No more families lose loved ones to corporate crime. No more whistleblowers silenced by threats." Diana was already at work setting up the foundation's office, turning James's old case files into resources for future fights. His law books would help train a new generation of advocates for justice. As Leah prepared for her first day of law school orientation, she placed her father's pocket watch on her desk, a reminder of where she came from and what she was fighting. For the inscription caught the morning light, "Justice is not a gift, but a fight worth having." Judge Grayson had agreed to mentor her through law school, impressed by her natural talent and unwavering dedication. "The law needs more people like you and your father," he'd told her. "People who see it as a tool for justice, not just a path to power." The final piece fell into place when Sandra revealed one last surprise. She was returning to practicing law full-time, focusing on corporate accountability cases. "Your father reminded me why I became a lawyer," she explained. "Some fights are worth the risk." 3 months later, the James Brooks Foundation for Corporate Justice opened its doors. Whistleblowers from across the country sought their help, finding support, legal resources, and a community of people who understood their struggles. Diana thrived in her new role, turning her experience into a source of strength for others. The scared, uncertain woman who'd lost her job was gone, replaced by a confident advocate for corporate accountability. And Leah? She balanced law school with foundation work, carrying forward her father's legacy while forging her own path. The pocket watch stayed with her, its inscription a daily reminder of what justice truly means. Not just a word in law books, but a principle worth fighting for, worth dying for, and most importantly, worth living for. The story of the teenager who took down a corporate giant became legend in legal circles, but Leah knew the real story was bigger than her. It was about every person who chose truth over fear, justice over convenience, right over easy. As she sat in her first law school class, Leah opened her notebook to a blank page. At the top, she wrote the words that would guide her future. "Justice is not a gift but a fight worth having, and it's a fight we'll never stop fighting."